Welcome to Starbound. If you're tired of AI-generated slop and want real human storytelling, subscribe to this channel. My name's Johnny. Let's begin. He was the most expensive asset on her battlecruiser, and the princess was inspecting him with the unmistakable air of someone about to demand a refund. Aiden stood on the polished hangar deck of the Athelian battlecruiser Imperious, a pocket of worn, scuffed reality amidst a sea of ostentatious military discipline. He'd been on board for less than an hour, and already felt the cloying sterility of the place trying to seep into his pores. The air, recycled to an engineered perfection, held no scent of engine oil, sweat, or fear. It was the kind of air that had never been near a real fight. He kept the posture of a man who'd been shot at in more star systems than this princess general had likely visited, a relaxed stance that was a finely tuned instrument for threat assessment. He let her circle him. This Princess General Zaltana Val Ethel, her armor a work of art that was probably worth more than his entire ship. The polished surfaces of her silver and cobalt plates reflected the harsh hangar lights in long, unbroken lines, a stark contrast to his own non-reflective matte black composite plates, which were a tapestry of carbon scoring and hairline fractures. Her inspection was as subtle as a plasma grenade in a library. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, raked over his kit with an unnerving focus. They were the eyes of a predator that had never known hunger, only the thrill of a hunt with a foregone conclusion. They lingered on the chunky, brutally functional form of his kinetic rifle, the Thunderclap, a Terran-made weapon known for punching through personal shields, armor, and often the person behind them with equal unceremonious prejudice. The rifle was an industrial tool designed for a single, messy purpose. He could see the distaste in her gaze as she cataloged its oversized caliber, the heavy-duty mag clamps, the wear on the grip where his glove had smoothed the textured polymer. "The Loyalist Council insisted," she said, her voice crisp and clipped, each word a perfectly formed shard of ice. It was a voice accustomed to echoing in vast halls, a voice that had never needed to be raised to be obeyed. "They spoke of Terran tenacity. They cited reports of your species' baffling pain tolerance and your unconventional tactics." She came to a halt before him, her statuesque Athelian frame making her nearly his height. The Athelians were tall and willowy, built like marathon runners, yet she carried the weight of her armor as if it were a second skin. "They paid a king's ransom for your services." She took a half-step closer, invading his personal space with the serene confidence of someone who owned the very air he breathed. "I see now they paid for a relic. Your species' defining trait seems to be surviving your own incompetence. I require a soldier, mercenary, not a living fossil whose equipment belongs in a museum of galactic warfare." Aiden didn't move a muscle, but a slow, lazy smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. He'd heard versions of this speech 100 times from a dozen different species. The proud ones, the ones born into power, were always the most predictable. They saw the lack of polish and missed the tempered steel underneath. They mistook scars for flaws instead of history. "You'll get what they paid for, Princess," he said, his voice a low, gravelly counterpoint to her bell-like tones, a sound like stones rolling in a slow river. "Let's just hope your plan is better than your insults, because one of them is going to get us killed, and my money isn't on the plan." Her perfect lips thinned into a razor line of disapproval. The muscle in her jaw jumped. For a moment, the air itself seemed to thin, charged with her fury. "My plans are flawless, mercenary. They are based on centuries of Athelian strategic doctrine. They account for every variable." "Every variable you can think of," Aiden corrected mildly, shifting his weight. The movement was economical and smooth, a predator's grace hidden within a brawler's frame. It's the other ones that tend to introduce you to a sudden, unscheduled afterlife. He cocked his head. So, this flawless plan, does it involve us standing here while your ex-boyfriend's army gets a clearer shot, or do we get to the fun part? For a moment, he thought she might actually strike him. Instead, she spun on her heel, her armored cloak flaring out like the wings of some majestic, condescending bird of prey.
Follow, and try to keep up. The extraction point is the roof of the Imperious spire,
Zaltana stated, her voice regaining its professional chill as she gestured to a holographic map that bloomed in the center of the cruiser's command post. The city of Ethelgard spread out below them in miniature, a grid of light and shadow carved into the heart of a colossal mountain range. The city didn't build up so much as it built in, its structures following the natural sweeping contours of the ancient rock.
My personal shuttle, the Vigilance, will descend on a secure, encrypted approach vector. Malakor's forces have control of the planetary anti-air grid, but not the local comnet. We bypassed their firewalls 2 rotations ago. Our window is small. His fleet cannot target what it cannot see.
Aiden leaned against a support column, arms crossed, listening with half an ear. It was a good plan. It was clean. It was elegant. It was the kind of plan that got drawn up by people who believed the enemy would play by the same rules. A chess master who'd never been punched in the face.
My honor guard will form a defensive perimeter,
she continued, oblivious to his skepticism, her finger tracing a glowing blue line across the map.
Once we are aboard, we will execute a high-atmosphere jump to the rally point in the Carina Vale. It is perfect.
Perfect, Aiden repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. You said that already.
Repetition reinforces fact, mercenary.
Sometimes it just reinforces denial. He pushed off the column and walked toward the holographic display, his heavy boots making a disrespectful sound on the immaculate deck. He pointed to the spire. What if they don't bother with the anti-air grid? What if they just use a ship-killer torpedo on the mountain's foundation? What about seismic charges? Or a localized EMP burst at street level to fry your local comnet advantage? What if they just collapse the spire from below? Zaltana's expression soured.
Such tactics are barbaric. They would cause unacceptable civilian casualties. Malakor, for all his faults, is still an Athelian. He would not...
He's a man who started a civil war to get his throne back, Aiden cut in, his tone flat. War's messy, Princess. Your ex-boyfriend doesn't seem too concerned about unacceptable casualties. He's already demonstrated he's willing to burn down the kingdom to rule the ashes. Before she could form a suitably withering retort, the sky ripped open. It wasn't a single explosion, but a symphony of them. The air pressure in the room dropped, making Aiden's ears pop. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the hellish orange glow of plasma impacts blossoming against the city's highest peaks. Great gouts of molten rock and metal vaporizing into the atmosphere. The deep, resonant whoomp of defensive anti-air cannons was conspicuously absent. Malakor's fleet hadn't bypassed the defenses. They had been welcomed through them. The command post's main comms unit, a sophisticated Athelian console, sputtered to life for a single horrifying second. It wasn't an incoming fire report. It was a voice Zaltana knew, a voice that had been her shadow for years. "Welcome, Lord Malakor," said a calm, measured male voice. It belonged to Cassian, her second in command, the man she had trusted with her life for a decade. "The princess is secure, as promised." The color drained from Zaltana's face. The strategic map vanished, leaving her staring into the empty space where her perfect plan had just been. The betrayal was so absolute, so inconceivable, that it froze her in place. Her entire world, built on pillars of honor and loyalty, had just been revealed as a house of cards in a hurricane. Then, the world ended. A plasma bolt, a spear of incandescent rage, struck the spire just below them. The entire building screamed, a shriek of tortured metal and groaning duracrete. The floor buckled like a living thing. Aiden was already moving, his body low, diving towards her. He was too late to stop the secondary impact. An armored bulkhead, torn loose from the ceiling by the violent tremor, slammed into the opposite wall. Zaltana, caught between, was thrown like a doll. She didn't even have time to cry out before a slab of reinforced wall collapsed inward, pinning her left leg against the floor with the force of a meteor strike. A sound tore from her throat, a raw, animal noise of pure agony that had nothing to do with a princess or a general. Her honor guard, the 6 elite Athelian warriors who had been setting up their perimeter, were simply gone. One moment they were there, disciplined and ready, their silver armor catching the light. The next, they were silhouettes against a wave of white-hot plasma that vaporized them into memory and static. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of screaming alarms, the crackle of fire, the screech of her own people's treachery, and the blinding, nauseating pain radiating from her shattered leg. Aiden was a creature of chaos. It was his natural habitat. While Zaltana's universe was imploding, his was simplifying. Threat, objective, action. He slid to a halt beside her, the floor slick with hydraulic fluid from a ruptured conduit. Her face was a mask of shock and agony. Her teeth gritted so hard he could hear them grinding. The slab pinning her was massive, a tombstone of ferrocrete and rebar. He unslung his thunderclap, letting it hang on its maglock harness, and jammed his sidearm, a heavy-caliber pistol, into her trembling hand. The grip was too large for her elegant fingers, but she took it, her knuckles white. "No time for strategy," he yelled over the roar of the collapsing building. "Just hold on and shoot anything that isn't me." He didn't waste time trying to lift the slab. He braced his feet, dug his fingers into the narrow gap where it met the floor, and heaved. Every muscle in his back and shoulders screamed in protest. He was strong, but this was a contest between human muscle and galactic-grade construction materials. For a second, nothing happened. The slab was an immovable object. Then, with a roar that was more animal than human, he shifted his angle, planting his boot against the wall and using his entire body as a lever. The slab groaned, lifted a precious few inches. Zaltana's sharp, agonized cry was swallowed by the din as she scrambled to pull her ruined leg free. The moment she was clear, Aiden let the slab crash back down with a floor-shaking thud. He didn't give her a moment to process the pain or the relief. He scooped her up, not with the grace of a hero in a holodrama, but with the brutal swiftness of a combat medic on a hot field. He slung her over his shoulder in a fireman's carry, her helmeted head dangling near his waist, her good leg kicking for purchase that wasn't there. "What are you, my leg?" she gasped, each word a spike of pain. "It's still attached," he barked back, already sprinting across the tilting floor. "We can argue about the details later." The extra weight was significant, but manageable. He was built for this. Humanity hadn't evolved on a pleasant, gravity-consistent garden world. They'd clawed their way up on a planet of earthquakes, floods, and predators, and then spent centuries fighting each other in the ruins. Carrying a heavy load through hell was practically a Terran pastime. He reached the shattered edge of the command post. A 20-foot chasm of fire and death separated them from the next rooftop. A lifetime ago, it might as well have been a light year. "Hold tight," he yelled. He ran straight for the edge. Just as he was about to leap, a nearby section of the spire, mortally wounded by another plasma strike, gave a final, shuddering groan. A huge slab of its facade, a tangled mess of duracrete and rebar, tore loose and fell, crashing across the gap with a deafening boom. It wasn't a bridge. It was a momentary, unstable catastrophe. It was already groaning, sliding into the abyss. It was enough. Aiden didn't hesitate. He launched himself onto the collapsing structure, his boots finding purchase on groaning metal. The makeshift bridge shifted violently under the combined weight, chunks of it crumbling away into the fiery depths. He ran, a human missile loaded with royalty, a desperate, heart-pounding sprint across a dying piece of architecture. He leapt from the far side just as the last of it gave way, plunging into the inferno below. He landed on the opposite rooftop with an impact that shuddered up his spine, rolling immediately to bleed off the momentum. He used his own body as a shield, his armor groaning and sparking as a spray of shrapnel from a nearby explosion rained down on them. He came up into a crouch, Zaltana still draped over his shoulder, and kept moving, his eyes already scanning for the next piece of cover, the next route through the unfolding destruction. A relic. She had called him a relic. Now his scarred arms were the only pillar holding up her world. The thought was a shard of glass in her throat, a truth so sharp and humiliating it stole what little breath she had left. He was too crude, she had judged, and now he was carrying her across a war zone, the only thing between her and a fiery grave. He found shelter in the hollowed-out carcass of a residential hablock. The air was thick with the dust of pulverized duracrete and the coppery scent of blood. He slid down a pile of rubble into what might have once been a living room, the panoramic window now a gaping maw overlooking the burning city. He set Zaltana down as gently as he could, propping her against a section of wall that looked marginally stable. Her face was pale, beaded with sweat, but her eyes were lucid, burning with a mixture of pain and a cold, hard fury. Her leg was a disaster. The unnatural angle of broken bone was horrifyingly obvious beneath the torn, blood-soaked fabric of her uniform. "Report," she rasped, the command automatic, ingrained by a lifetime of authority. Aiden ignored it. He was already pulling his medkit from a thigh pouch. It wasn't the sleek, auto-diagnosing Athelian equipment she was used to, with its sterile fields and sonic scalpels. It was a rugged, overstuffed pouch filled with things designed for messy, asymmetrical survival. He produced a canister labeled with stark, functional Terran script, CS7, Chemical Biosplint. "This is gonna burn," he warned, his tone leaving no room for argument. He tore the fabric of her trousers away from the wound with a single, decisive rip, exposing a deep, ragged laceration weeping dark, violet Athelian blood over the mangled shape of her skin. Before she could protest his rough handling, he sprayed a thick white foam from the canister directly onto the injury. Zaltana hissed, her back arching as a searing chemical heat flooded the area. It felt like being branded and frozen at the same time. The foam instantly sealed the lacerations with a web of fast-clotting polymers, then began to harden with an audible crackling sound, conforming perfectly to her leg. Within seconds, it was a rigid, bone-white cast, and a powerful, long-lasting anesthetic was seeping into her system, dulling the razor's edge of the pain to a throbbing, manageable ache. She slumped back against the wall, breathing heavily. The relief was so profound it was disorienting. Your field medicine is barbaric." "It works," Aiden countered, not looking up. He was checking the splint's seal, his calloused fingers probing the edges with deliberate care. "It's ugly. It hurts like hell for 10 seconds, but you won't bleed out and the bone will set clean. We can worry about aesthetics when we are not in the middle of a city that's actively trying to kill us." "The way you carried me," she began, her voice tight with a fresh wave of indignation. "You could have crippled me permanently. That jarring, it was reckless." Aiden finally looked at her, his dark eyes flat and devoid of apology. "The other option was letting a plasma bolt turn your head into a fine red mist. Leg seemed like the better deal. The jarring was me getting you out of the kill box before your ex's elite guard came upstairs to mop up. You're welcome, by the way." He gave the splint one last pat. "Stay still. The anesthetic needs a minute to fully saturate. And listen, That splint will hold the bone, but it won't fix the torn muscle or the shock. Don't get any heroic ideas about sprinting. His blunt, unassailable pragmatism left no room for her pride, no quarter for her outrage. He was right. Every instinct she possessed as a general screamed that he was right. Honor, doctrine, and perfect plans hadn't saved her. They had betrayed her. A cynical, sarcastic human with a first aid kit full of caustic foam had. The thought was galling, and to her profound horror, a little bit thrilling. They moved through the skeletal remains of the city like ghosts. The constant thrum of distant battle was their soundtrack. Aiden led the way, his thunderclap held at a low ready, his head on a constant swivel. Zaltana followed, leaning heavily on a length of rebar he found for her that was surprisingly light and strong. Her new splint was a miracle of ugly, functional engineering, but every step was a fresh agony. The anesthetic dulled the sharpest edges of pain, but a deep, grinding ache remained, a grim reminder of her body's betrayal. The shock of the injury had settled deep in her bones, and a cold sweat clung to her skin. Each time she put weight on the makeshift crutch, her teeth ground together. This was a battle of pure will against her own screaming nerves. Their immediate goal was supplies. Power cells, water, anything salvageable. They found what they were looking for in a wrecked Athelian patrol skimmer, nose down in a crater. Its lights were dead, its hull scorched and peppered with shrapnel.
The power reserves should still be viable,
Zaltana said, her strategic mind reasserting itself like a muscle memory. She hobbled to the vehicle's side, running a hand over an access terminal.
If I can interface with the diagnostic port, I can initiate a power shunt to a portable cell. The command codes are complex, but I know the overrides.
She tapped at the dark screen. Nothing. She tried again, her frustration mounting.
The impact must have fried the primary interface. It's useless. Shoddy battle-damaged mitigation.
Aiden watched her for a moment, then grunted. He holstered his pistol, pulled a wicket-long combat knife from his boot, and moved to a different panel on the skimmer's underbelly. He didn't bother with the terminal. He jammed the tip of the knife into the seam and pried. The panel came off with a screech of protesting metal. Inside was a nest of wiring and conduits. Zaltana stared, aghast.
What are you doing? You'll short the entire system. That's the primary power distribution node.
Yep, Aiden said, peering into the mess. His eyes traced the flow of energy not by diagram, but by instinct. He located a thick, insulated cable, stripped a section of it bare with 2 deft swipes of his knife, and then did the same to a smaller one. He pulled a portable power cell from his pack, a flat gray brick of Terran design, scratched and dented. Watch your eyes. With the calm ease of a back-alley mechanic, he touched the bare wires to the terminals of his power cell. There was a loud crack and a shower of brilliant blue sparks. The skimmer's internal lights flickered on for a moment, and the charging indicator on Aiden's power cell glowed a solid green. He disconnected, the whole process taking less than 30 seconds. He tossed the now fully charged cell to her. She caught it out of sheer reflex, staring at him as if he'd just performed some kind of profane magic. To her, an Athelian engineer would spend an hour respectfully coaxing the machine back to life with diagnostic tools and buffered commands. Aiden had just mugged it.
That was sacrilege,
she breathed. He gave her a look, wiping his knife clean on his trousers. Sometimes you gotta get your hands dirty, princess. Procedures are for when things work. When they don't, you make a new procedure. It's called getting it done. He gestured with the knife back towards the ruins. Now, let's find somewhere to hole up before one of Malicor's patrols finds his looted skimmer. She looked from the violated machine to the full power cell in her hand, then to Aiden's smirking face. He was an agent of chaos, a barbarian, and he was undeniably, infuriatingly effective. The roar of an approaching heavy patrol skimmer sent them scrambling for cover. There was no time to find a defensible position, only a place to hide. Aiden spotted it first, a dark, narrow opening in the foundation of a collapsed building. A sewage conduit. "In here, now!" he hissed, practically shoving her towards it. Zaltana recoiled for a split second, her aristocratic nose wrinkling at the thought. The low, guttural thrum of the skimmer's engines grew louder, closer, shaking the very rubble under her feet. Pride versus survival. It wasn't a contest. She slid into the narrow cylindrical space, the darkness swallowing her. It was tight, smelling of damp stone, moss, and something vaguely unpleasant. Aiden slid in right behind her, pulling a loose grate over the opening. The world went from gray twilight to absolute black. The conduit was barely wide enough for one person, let alone two. They were pressed together, her back flushed against his chest, the hard plates of his armor an undeniable presence against her. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, a stark contrast to the cool, damp air. His steady, rhythmic breathing was a solid, living thing against her shoulders, a rock of calm in the suffocating darkness. She smelled the faint, metallic scent of gun oil, the ozone tang from his sidearm, and the earthy, human scent of his sweat. It was entirely alien and overwhelmingly real. The professional distance between them, the roles of client and mercenary, evaporated. It was stripped away by proximity, by the shared primal need to be invisible. There was only the heat, the dark, and the unavoidable, raw intimacy of their bodies pressed together. She could feel the solid muscle of his thigh against her hip, his arm a protective bar around her. She was acutely aware of the steady, slow beat of his heart against her back. The patrol skimmer rumbled past overhead, its searchlight briefly playing across the grate, casting fleeting stripes of light into their tomb. The sound faded into the distance. Silence descended again, thick and heavy. Aiden didn't move immediately. Neither did she. The moment stretched, charged with an energy that had nothing to do with combat. She could feel the tension in his muscles begin to ease, and was surprised by a pang of disappointment. Finally, he shifted back a few inches, giving her space that hadn't existed a moment before. "All clear," he murmured, his voice a low rumble in the confined space. Zaltana pushed herself forward, away from his heat, her own breath catching in her throat. They pulled apart, and the sudden cold air on her back felt like a loss. The silence between them was no longer just the absence of noise. It was a canvas, and something new and unspoken had just been painted on it. They found a more suitable fortress in the ruins of a municipal library. Data slates and illuminated scrolls were scattered everywhere, a testament to a more civilized time. From a shattered second-floor window, they had a commanding view of the surrounding streets. It was as defensible as they were going to get. As Zaltana set up a discreet observation post, her leg propped carefully on a pile of ancient legal texts, Aiden took the opportunity to field strip and clean his thunderclap. He worked with a calm, meditative focus, each movement deliberate and familiar. Her eyes were drawn to his forearms. They were corded with muscle and latticed with old, silvery scars. Most were the thin, clean lines of blade wounds or the puckered marks of energy burns. But one was different, a jagged, ugly thing that ran from his wrist to his elbow, a chaotic map of torn flesh long since healed. It didn't look like a wound from any weapon she recognized.
"A battle wound?"
she asked, her voice softer than she'd intended. Aiden paused, his hands stilling on the rifle's bolt carrier. He followed her gaze to the scar, a ghost of a memory in his eyes. He flexed his fingers, the scar tissue pulling tight. "This one? Nah, this one's old." He set the rifle part down on a dusty tome of poetry. "Got it from prying a sheet of corrugated steel off my little brother. We were kids, living in the Jakarta reclamation zone back on Terra. A flash flood hit our hab block. The whole lower level just collapsed. The water was rising fast. He looked at the scar, not with pride or shame, but with a simple, quiet acceptance. He was pinned good. Edge was sharp as a razor. I had to just get my arms under it and lift. Tore me up pretty good. He shrugged, a simple gesture that carried a world of weight. But I got him out. You learn to ignore pain when the clock is ticking on someone you love. Sultana was quiet for a long time. She tried to imagine it. Not the pain, but the choice. The absolute, unhesitating certainty required to make that choice. She whispered, "What happened to your brother?" Aiden's expression softened. "He's fine. Runs a hydroponics farm on Europa. Has 3 kids, all of them smarter than me. But every time it rains too hard, I can still feel the weight of that metal." This story landed with stunning force. It struck a deeper blow than any plasma bolt. In Athelian culture, a scar was a mark of failure. It meant your armor was flawed, your technique was imperfect, your parry was a fraction of a second too slow. Scars were things to be minimized, hidden, or repaired with expensive tissue regeneration. They were symbols of shame. To hear him speak of this terrible, disfiguring wound, not as a failure, but as a simple record of saving someone, it rewired her brain. It reframed her entire lifelong concept of strength. Strength wasn't about avoiding injury. It was about perfect execution. It was about what you were willing to endure. It was about the price you paid to protect what mattered. She looked at her own hands, her skin smooth and unmarred, save for a few minor training scrapes. For the first time in her life, she felt fragile. From their library perch, they had a clear line of sight to a secondary commercial spaceport on the city's outskirts. It was smaller, less fortified, and crawling with Malakor's troops. But it was operational. Freighters were still taking off, likely filled with looted goods. Sultana's strategic mind, now fueled by a new, desperate kind of clarity, ignited. She pulled up a schematic of the spaceport on her datapad, its screen casting a blue glow on her determined face. "Here," she said, her voice sharp with purpose. "We can bypass the main security checkpoint by using these maintenance tunnels. They are shielded from internal scanners. We emerge behind the primary fuel depot. From there, it is a 200-meter dash across the open ground to the courier ship berths. I will create a localized comms blackout, giving us 38 seconds before their network reboots. We move on my signal." It was a brilliant plan. It was intricate, timed to the second, and relied on the enemy systems behaving exactly as predicted. It was an Athelian plan. Aiden listened patiently, chewing on a strip of dried protein from his rations. When she finished, he swiped a finger across her datapad, zooming in on a section of the schematic. "It's a good plan," he said. She felt a flicker of pride. Then he continued. "It's also clean, predictable, and will get us killed the second something goes wrong. And something always goes wrong." He tapped the fuel lines. "Your blackout is too quiet. They'll notice the silence. We don't need a blackout. We need a festival. We blow the fuel lines. They'll be so busy fighting the fire, they won't even see us coming." Sultana stared at him. "That's insane. The shockwave could destroy the very ships we're trying to reach." "Not if we're smart about it," Aiden countered, his eyes gleaming with a wild energy. He pointed to a large ventilation tower adjacent to the fuel depot. "We don't just start a fire. We direct it. I saw structural weakness in that tower on the approach, a support pylon that's already damaged. We plant a charge there and on the main fuel conduit. We blow the pylon first, then the fuel. The tower will fall away from the berths, creating a perfect wall of flame and wreckage between us and Malakor's goons." It was a chaotic, reckless, utterly human plan. It relied on gut instinct, controlled demolition, and turning the enemy's assets into a weapon against them. It was the tactical equivalent of the way he'd hotwired the skimmer. Brute force, applied with savage intelligence. She looked from the neat, orderly lines of her plan on the datapad to the fierce, determined certainty on his face. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a force of nature, and she was beginning to understand that to survive nature, you had to become a part of it. She took a deep breath, the dust of forgotten knowledge filling her lungs, and nodded.
Show me where to plant the charge.
The plan was motion, pure adrenaline-fueled motion. The diversion was apocalyptic. A pillar of incandescent orange fire roared into the sky as the fuel line ruptured. The massive ventilation tower groaned, tilted, and crashed to the ground with the force of a titan, creating a perfect burning wall. Alarms blared across the spaceport. Athelian soldiers, trained for threats from predictable vectors, were thrown into disarray. In that beautiful, calculated chaos, they moved. Zaltana became a living turret. Her leg was an anchor of pain, but her will was iron. She found cover behind a thick cargo container, propped herself up, and her plasma pistol barked. Once, twice, each shot a masterpiece of lethal economy. A neck joint, an optical sensor. No wasted energy, no missed shots. The Athelian way. Aiden was the storm around her, a whirlwind of violence. He didn't use cover so much as create it, kicking over tool carts and sliding between them to lay down suppressing fire. The thunderclap roared, its heavy slugs chewing through concrete and plasteel, forcing heads down. He didn't aim for specific points. He aimed for mass, for area denial. He created zones of death, trusting the gun to do the work. The human way. Win by any means necessary. She was the scalpel. He was the maul.
Hostile, 3 o'clock, elevated,
she'd call out, her voice a sharp crackle over their private comm. Even as the words left her lips, Aiden was sending a volley of rounds at the sniper's perch, not necessarily to hit, but to force the shooter's head down, to ruin the shot. "Reloading!" he'd shout. She picked off 2 advancing soldiers who tried to take advantage of the lull. 1, 2, buying him the seconds he needed. Together, they were a fusion of order and chaos, a general's strategy married to a survivor's ferocity. They carved a path through the panicked, disorganized Athelian guard, the fire and smoke their shield. Ahead of them, nestled in a berth miraculously untouched by the main blast, was a courier-class dropship. Its landing gear was down, its ramp open. Its name was painted on the side in faded lettering. Stardust Drifter. It was the ugliest, most beautiful ship Zaltana had ever seen. They blasted off the tarmac with alarms screaming from the ship's console and a trio of Malicor's Viper-class fighters screaming on their tail. The Stardust Drifter was a freighter, not a gunship. It handled like a pregnant bantha.
"They're gaining! Evasive maneuvers! Pattern Delta 9!
Zaltana yelled from the co-pilot's seat, her hands flying over the weapons and shield controls. She managed to get the aft shields energized just as a volley of plasma fire washed over them. Aiden just grinned, his knuckles white on the flight yoke. "Never heard of it, Princess, but I know this one." He yanked the ship into a gut-wrenching dive, pulling out just meters above the spaceport's sprawling rooftops.
"Bank left! They're locking on!"
Zaltana shouted, her training battling with the sheer terror of his flying. "Ever heard of a crazy Ivan?" Aiden yelled back over the groan of stressed metal. Without waiting for an answer, he slammed the portside thrusters into full reverse while kicking the main drive to maximum. The ship spun on its axis, a maneuver so violent and unexpected that Zaltana was thrown against her restraints. For a moment, they were flying backward, facing their pursuers. The Athelian pilots, accustomed to predictable combat arcs and graceful, sweeping maneuvers, were completely thrown. Zaltana didn't waste the opening. A vengeful smile touched her lips as she acquired a target lock.
"Firing!"
she cried, loosing a barrage of concussion missiles. 2 of the Vipers caught flat-footed, vanished in brilliant blossoms of light. The third veered off, its pilot clearly unnerved. But Aiden wasn't done. He pushed the drifter through a canyon of urban debris and shattered skyscrapers, scraping the ship's belly on a fallen antenna array with a screech that set Zaltana's teeth on edge. His reckless, utterly unpredictable flying made a mockery of Athelian's sophisticated targeting systems. They couldn't hit what they couldn't predict. Finally, Zaltana landed a lucky shot on the third fighter's engine. It trailed black smoke and corkscrewed down into the burning city below. Silence fell in the cockpit, broken only by a cacophony of damage alarms. Zaltana sagged in her seat, her heart hammering against her ribs.
"That was not in my manual,"
she said, her voice breathless. Aiden shot her a wild grin. "That's why it worked." Their victory was short-lived. The Stardust Drifter was dying. The dogfight and Aiden's creative piloting had taken a toll. Red lights flashed across every console. The main drive was sputtering, and the port stabilizer was gone entirely.
"We're not going to make the Veil,"
Zaltana said, her voice grim as she read the damage reports scrolling on her screen.
"We're leaking fuel and atmosphere. We have, at best, one short-range jump before the reactor goes critical."
Aiden's grin was gone, replaced by a frown of concentration. He scanned the nav chart. "Okay, new plan." He pointed to a blinking icon on the edge of Athelian space. "Here, the Anvil. It's a neutral trade station, big, lawless, full of the galaxy's finest scum. It's the only port within range."
"The Anvil is a pirate haven,"
Zaltana protested.
"It's dangerous."
"Princess," Aiden said, his voice flat. "We are flying a stolen, half-destroyed ship with a critical reactor failure. Dangerous is our new home address." They limped through the jump, the ship screaming in protest as it tore a hole in space-time. They emerged into the chaotic, neon-drenched space around the Anvil. It was a monstrosity of a station, a collection of asteroids, derelict capital ships, and purpose-built habitats all fused together with centuries of unregulated construction into one sprawling, independent city. They didn't so much land as controlledly crash. Aiden aimed for a public docking bay, bypassing all formal landing regulations. The Stardust Drifter hit the deck hard, its damaged landing gear collapsing. It skidded across the bay in a shower of sparks and deafening screech of tortured metal, finally groaning to a halt just inches from a fortified blast door. The ship fell silent, the hum of the dying engines fading into a final, mournful groan. Aiden was already unbuckling himself, his face a grim mask. Something was wrong. His combat senses, honed by years of walking into traps, were screaming at him. "No way," he muttered, his eyes scanning the empty docking bay through the cracked viewport. It was too quiet, too clean for a public bay on a station like the Anvil.
"What is it?"
Zaltana asked, wincing as she unstrapped herself. "They're targeting telemetry in that canyon," he said, thinking aloud, his mind racing back through the fight. "It was too good. That last pilot had a hard lock on us. He shouldn't have been able to track our ship through all that interference. It wasn't the ship he was tracking. It was you." His eyes widened in sudden, dawning horror. He didn't go for the ship's wiring this time. He grabbed a small, multi-purpose scanner from his belt and spun towards her, his expression grim. "Stay still." It ran the scanner over her. It beeped insistently when he passed it over the ornate cuff of her general's tunic. His face darkened. With his knife, he carefully slit the seam. Tucked inside the thick, embroidered fabric was a tiny, wafer-thin disc of polished metal. Elegant, sophisticated, Athelian Royal Guard issue. "A homing beacon," he said, his voice dangerously low. He held it up for her to see. "Cassian didn't just sell you out. He gift-wrapped you. He tagged you like an animal. This thing wasn't just tracking you for the fighters. It was pinging ahead, broadcasting your location to anyone with the right receiver. They weren't chasing us to the Anvil." Crushed the beacon between his thumb and forefinger. "They were already here, waiting for you to arrive." As if on cue, The massive blast doors at the far end of the docking bay exploded inward. The thunderous boom was followed by the disciplined, clanking footsteps of armored soldiers. Malicor's elite guard, the Ironsworn, stormed in, their plasma rifles leveled, their polished crimson armor absorbing the harsh bay lights. They had been here the whole time, a private welcome party booked in advance. The trap had been sprung. They were pinned behind the wreckage of the drifter's cockpit, plasma bolts searing the air around them. Aiden was down to his sidearm, the Thunderclap's ammo spent. Zaltana had her pistol, but they were outnumbered at least 20-1.
This is a suboptimal tactical situation,
Zaltana yelled, ducking as a volley of fire slagged the bulkhead above her head. You think? Aiden yelled back, squeezing off 2 deliberate shots that made one of the Ironsworn soldiers stumble. Your people really know how to hold a grudge. An explosion from a grenade rocked their cover, throwing them against each other. The ship groaned, and for a split second, in the ringing silence after the blast, there was a lull. In that heartbeat, Zaltana looked at Aiden, her breath hitched. This was it, the end of the line, fighting back-to-back with a barbarian mercenary in a pirate spaceport. It should have been a dishonorable, terrifying end. Instead, a strange, fierce clarity washed over her. She reached out and grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. He turned, and their eyes locked. There, in the heart of the firefight, a universe of understanding passed between them. It was a silent promise, a rejection of Malicor, of honorable deaths, of a life lived in a gilded cage. It was an acceptance of this, of him. If we die, her eyes said, we die together, fighting our way. He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. A new, dangerous energy sparked between them. An Ironsworn soldier rounded the wreckage, raising his rifle. Zaltana saw him, saw the clean, perfect shot to his helmet's optical sensor she could make. The Athelian way. She deliberately looked away from the perfect shot. Her gaze fell on a pile of metallic shavings and dust from the crash. A small, wicked smile touched her lips. She kicked it, hard. A cloud of fine, abrasive particles flew directly into the soldier's face. He cried out, instinctively dropping his rifle to claw at his eyes, blinded and disoriented. It was only then that Zaltana shot him, a simple, effective round to the chest. It was her first dirty trick, and it felt like a revolution. Aiden saw it, and a wide, predatory grin spread across his face. There you go. His eyes darted past her, to the ship's ruptured fuel line, which was dripping a steady stream of fluid that shifted from blue to violet onto the deck. A plan, chaotic and beautiful, sparked between them without another word. Cover me, he yelled. She didn't hesitate. She laid down a volley of covering fire, her shots no less deliberate, but now aimed to distract, to force the enemy into a tighter group. Aiden scrambled over to the leaking fuel line, yanking a power cell from his belt. He didn't need a complex detonator. He just needed a spark. Now, he roared, diving back behind cover beside her. Zaltana took a deep breath, aimed, and fired. Her plasma bolt, a spear of brilliant blue energy, struck the puddle of fuel. The resulting explosion was a deep, soul-shaking whoomp. A cleansing, rolling fireball of blue and orange flame engulfed the entire front rank of Malicor's forces, turning their disciplined advance into a fiery rout. Silence fell, absolute and profound, broken only by the crackle of burning metal and the distant wail of the Anvil's station-wide alarms. The air tasted of burnt fuel and victory. For a long moment, neither of them moved. They stayed crouched behind the wreckage, the heat of the fire washing over them. The ringing in their ears slowly subsided. Bruised, exhausted, covered in grime, they took a deep, shuddering breath in unison. The surviving Ironsworn were gone, retreating in disarray. Slowly, they rose. They stood amidst the smoking ruin of their enemies and looked out. Beyond the mangled docking bay doors lay the sprawling, neon-soaked, chaotic panorama of the Anvil, a city of 10 million stories waiting to be written. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. And something else, something fierce and undeniable. Zaltana turned to him. In the flickering light of the fires, his face was a landscape of grit and weary triumph. Before logic or strategy or a lifetime of conditioning could stop her, she closed the distance between them. She threaded her fingers into the hair at the nape of his neck, pulled his face down to hers, and kissed him. It was a kiss of overwhelming relief, of shared victory. It was slow and deep, and spoke of shattered worlds and new beginnings. It tasted of smoke and survival, and a future that was suddenly, terrifyingly, wonderfully unwritten. When she pulled back, her breath was unsteady, her eyes shining with a light he'd never seen before. He slung a tired arm over her shoulders, pulling her against his side. The contact was easy, natural, right. "So," he said, his voice a low, amused rumble. "What's the plan now, Princess?" She leaned into his strength, the hard lines of his armor a comfort against her. She looked out at the hive of scum and villainy, at the endless, unpredictable possibilities. A small, genuine smile played on her lips. "For the first time in my life," she said, her voice full of a strange new lightness, "I don't have one." She looked up at him, her eyes dancing. "It's exhilarating."